Okay, everyone, the Celtic Way weekly episode number 2. Thank you very much for your nice comments and just your general comments on last week's opening show. Much appreciated, John, wasn't it?
It was. It's one of those things where you're starting something, even though we're on YouTube quite a lot, but when you're starting something a bit new or a new kind of thing, you're worried, is anyone even going to watch it or is anyone even going to like it? And thankfully, a lot of people did watch it. A lot of people did like it and genuinely appreciate all the feedback. Like the support that we get on a daily basis, a weekly basis is really, it actually helps us do what we do. Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate what Hamish is saying. We really appreciate it and thanks for all the support and the continued support.
Yeah, a few people were wondering, when is this going to be going out? The plan is to have it out on a Monday evening going forwards. So that's obviously the case this week, and then we'll just take it from there. There may be the occasional week where it's maybe in a slightly different time slot, just depending on what's going on. But yeah, that is the plan. I've had 4 hours sleep, John. I was
Nice.
up watching the game, did a video after the game, and then we're up doing this. So we're not covering anything heavy duty today, are we?
No, just the existential crisis that is Celtic. Nothing major, Hamish.
Right. Okay. So we've got well, you've done a pile of research today. So there's loads of stuff, loads of different quotes that various people at Celtic have said in recent times. We're going to dig into Paul Tisdale a bit. We're going to look maybe briefly at Michael Nicholson, Chris Mackay. There's only so much you can do with those two because you don't ever really hear from them. Certainly a bit on Dermot Desmond as well. Some things he said. Have a good chat. And also, yeah, the game. We beat Aberdeen as well. So lots to
Yes.
talk about.
Yeah, there is lots to talk about. I think, yeah, we'll start with the game and then talk a bit about the key figures at the club because just the way Brendan Rodgers was answering questions again on Friday, we're not going to get too much into the moaning about transfers. We're going to try and work and talk through how transfers actually work at Celtic, what the process is, who the figures involved are, and why Brendan Rodgers isn't particularly able to answer some of the questions that he's fielding right now, and if there's a better way forward for Celtic in terms of like a better structure or more visible accountability on some of these issues. And that's all to come. I think obviously we'll start off positively, Hamish. The performance against Aberdeen wasn't a blowaway performance, but functional, professional, did the job. A couple of nice goals, job done, 3 points.
Yeah, I mean it's a victory, and it's the kind of start you want to the season. Couple of clean sheets. I mean, there's always a tendency, I think, at the moment when there's so much kind of negativity out there to kind of force yourself into being positive. I genuinely didn't think it was a great performance. That's
No.
just my view on how I watched the game. Certainly in an attacking sense, I thought, our passing at times was pretty poor. I think we'll play a lot better. The point I would make, I think defensively, we looked really solid. And I think as much as like we all feel we need players, and clearly we do, they are kind of all mainly attacking players. Like I think if you settled with the defence we've got right now, certainly first choice, I'd be pretty happy with that. I think Simpson Pusey, bit of debate whether he comes in and plays in the first team. Personally, I think he's been signed to be a partner for Cameron Carter-Vickers, but we'll see how that goes. But no, I think solid defence. Kieran Tierney, who there's more to come from him. You just see his quality yesterday on a couple of occasions. Thought Alistair Johnson for me was potentially our best player yesterday. He's just excellent, and he's got more levels to go as well. Carter Vickers. Scales had a wee bit of a nightmare in possession yesterday,
Yeah.
but we another clean sheet, and I mean a lot will be made of Aberdeen's poor performance, but how much of that is us not allowing them to create anything?
I think the problems with Scales sometimes is that he's a little bit up and down. Like I thought he had a pretty good game against St Mirren, and then yeah, yesterday he wasn't particularly great. Unfortunately, I thought you mentioned defence there, and obviously the midfield as well, Nigrin and Hatate. Not just with their goals, but I thought they brought real urgency to the performance, specifically Nigrin on that right side. It's going to be said a million times, so I don't want to wear it out, but very reminiscent of Matt O'Reilly in the way that he sinks into those right-sided channels, combines with a winger, combines with a fullback, and you saw it, in the way that he set up for Hatate's screamer of a goal, and just how he can be influential in those moments, as well as arriving into that box, Hamish. Now, that has been noted as a potential key to his game this season. That arrival in the box late, that ghosting into the box around opposition defenders who might not quite have worked him out yet. And even, I think what's key, Hamish, is even if they start to work out his patterns of movement into the box, that's only going to free up space for others in the team as well. So it's win-win in that regard for saying you see his finishing instincts. Now, Nygren started his career as a kind of central forward, central attacking figure. And you can see that ability and that finishing ability because he got over the ball really well. And I just put it this way, I think that's going to be the first of quite a few goals from Benjamin Nygren this season.
Yeah. If you watch the goal, actually, the ball kind of starts on the right-hand side and he's actually away wide right, linking the play. Yeah. And probably 5, maybe 10 seconds later, he's putting the ball in the back of the net. So I'd urge people, go back and watch the highlights and watch his movement. It's nothing crazy. There's no sprinting going on there. It's just very clever movement. I was about to just compare him to Lionel Messi there in terms of his ability to find a little gap. And you know that way Messi always I was actually watching Jackson Irvine and Joe Hart chatting earlier on Joe Hart's podcast, the FIFA Pro one, and Jackson Irvine was speaking about the magic of Messi. And that, you spend your whole game plan trying to stop him, yet he still finds a way to find a little gap in the box. Nygren's got a touch of that in terms of his movement anyway. But no, I think he's going to score so many goals. He should already have 2 for us because he should have scored against St Mirren as well.
So that comparison is going to be officially going to be the first Celtic Way Weekly clip that makes its way into follow. And I think the Celtic Way Weekly will be cancelled after episode 2, but I appreciate your point. No, I get it. I do get what you're trying to... I get the point that you're making there.
I've not compared them to Messi. Don't worry. I mean, that was a terrible point. But no, I think he looks really good. Actually, there's more to come from him as well. That's the thing.
Yeah, and it's just that awareness, isn't it? So you love a player with awareness because that's what separates the good players from the great players at Celtic, is that game awareness and that understanding of positioning and opposition players, because it can be difficult. And I thought actually Aberdeen weren't really in the game from an attacking perspective apart from those first 10 minutes or so, but defensively I thought they were fairly organised throughout, and it did take a fair bit of effort on Celtic's part to kind of figure out how to get past that. So fair play to them. As you say, I didn't think it was a fantastic performance by any means, but it's one of those ones where whenever Celtic go to Pittodrie, I'm always delighted to come away with 3 points.
And after your comments last week, Yang didn't even get a minute on the pitch, which I thought was interesting. I think a bit of a statement from the manager, putting Nygren on the right rather than bringing Yang. Because I think, did we only use 4 subs, or certainly at that stage we'd only used 4 subs. So I thought that was quite telling as well.
Yeah, well, clearly Brendan Rodgers is an avid watcher of the Celtic Way Weekly as well. Another new viewer for us. No, in all seriousness, yeah, it's notable, but kind of not surprising. I really just thought Yang was awful last week, and we had a few comments saying, it's maybe not fair to blame Yang because maybe the fullbacks weren't involved around him, or the midfielders weren't involved around him as much as they could have been against St Mirren, and I do take that on board. I wasn't trying to single out Yang from a scapegoat perspective of what went wrong against St Mirren. It was more a sense of what can we get from that position? What urgency and directness can we get from that position that Yang wasn't offering? And yeah, again, Forrest, he wasn't fantastic against Aberdeen, but I thought he was certainly brighter than Yang would have been in that match from my perspective. So again, notable that Rodgers didn't turn to him at all, but not particularly surprising, and it kind of throws into doubt where Yang is heading at Celtic, I suppose, as well. I guess we'll find that out over the next couple of weeks as well.
Yeah, we'll also find out this week who we're going to be playing in that vital Champions League tie that's now next week, John. As everyone's watching this, we're talking first leg is at 9 days, so that's quite a scary thought. Just if anyone's not aware, you probably are by now, the deadline, I believe, for registering players in terms of the normal deadline is actually Thursday. So Celtic will have to put in a 25-man squad at that stage. However, we do have up until the night before the first leg to register another 2 players. So there is still time, but the club have to actually register the 25-man squad this week. We've got a kind of level or two to go for that tie for me. I mean, it's I
Yeah.
think either team are going to be a step up from what we faced yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I watched bits of that game last week between Kera and Bratislava, and obviously, I think what's important to note about these qualifiers is sometimes, it's obviously about the quality of the opposition, but the occasion makes teams raise their game. These are massive, massive games for these clubs, for Celtic even, but for these clubs as well, that really can define. Like for Kera, if they got into the league phase of the Champions League, that's just so huge for them. So if they got through and played Celtic, that adds an element of danger to the entire prospect for me. It's not just about the quality of their team and their players, it's what the occasion can provide in terms of danger to Celtic, and that's important to note as well. And I really got a sense of that in that Bratislava game, because there was quite a lot of controversy. Everyone was trying so hard. You could see the effort, you could see the passion in the match, and that's an intensity that Celtic need to get to. And as you say, I just don't think they're quite there yet, obviously.
I think Slovan will come back tomorrow night. I think it'll be Slovan we play, but we'll wait and see. The other point I just wanted to make, and it kind of loosely links into the Champions League stuff. So we found out this week that Celtic aren't going to postpone the Livingston game. We're going to play that. Brendan Rodgers has confirmed that's the case. It means that with Rangers deciding to postpone their game, which I think is away to St Mirren that weekend, we're going to have the chance to go to Ibrox 7 points clear if we beat Livingston at home. And Livingston have started well, a draw, and they beat Falkirk this weekend, so they're near the top of the league as well. But clearly, even with changes, that's going to be a game you fancy us to win. So, got 7 points clear going to Ibrox. That's a lot of pressure on Rangers. They quite like pressure, don't? Oh no, they don't like pressure. That's it. They struggle with pressure famously, don't they? So I think it could be a bit of a masterstroke from Celtic to play this game. Obviously, we need to go and win it, but yeah.
Yeah, Brendan Rodgers' point on that when he was speaking over the last few days, I'm not sure exactly when, it's all blurred to me at this point, but Brendan Rodgers said at some point that there was no chance of that game getting postponed, and that it's really because it's still early in the season. He still feels like he's building his players up in terms of fitness, and so he sees that game as a chance for Celtic to still find their sharpness, rather than take the rest for the second leg, which I think is a fair enough viewpoint. I think my only point last week, when it was just the amount of travel involved, it might have made things a little bit easier. I mean, the rest of the clubs have done it, Celtic haven't, and I do agree. Like, I think Brendan Rodgers likes to have the games in the bag, doesn't he? He doesn't like these looming fixtures. He's talked about that before, of getting the points on the board type thing. So I could definitely see his point of view, and I understand it fully. And it would be good to go to Ibrox 7 points clear, don't get me wrong, and I imagine you're 10 points clear at the end of August, Hamish, and you get a few players in the door and transfer, and everyone's frowns have been turned upside down.
But like things can change so quickly, and I think like what you've just described there, like, isn't a totally unrealistic thing that could happen. Like Celtic are going to sign players before the end of the window. That's going to happen. The question marks are, what kind of players are we going to sign? Are they going to be last minute scrambles again, like we've seen maybe in recent years, certain loan players and stuff like that? But we're going to sign players. The team are winning games. I mean, that was a tough looking game yesterday, and they dealt with that well. And there's so much more to come from them as well. I mean, Daizen Maeda has not kicked the ball yet this season. He keeps falling over the minute he runs through and goal. So when he gets back to his level, he'll be excellent. Right winger hopefully signed. Hopefully, striker situation. We don't need to do that this week, John. We've done that, and I think other people have spoken about it. Ida struggled again. Midfield is kind of ticking along, but there's so much more to come there. No, I think there's reasons to feel good, but there's also this looming recruitment stuff as well that just is quite frustrating.
Yeah, it's frustrating. It is frustrating. It's frustrating because it brings negativity around the club, and I think the concerns are natural and worth talking about, and that's why we do talk about them on a regular basis. It also creates a lot of kind of rumour and speculation, and then it muddies the waters on where everyone believes things stand, and then you get conspiracy theories start up about who's involved in what and what they're doing here and there and everywhere. And sometimes I think the reality of what's happening is lost. And actually, I found in my life in general that when it comes to these kind of grand theories about things, sometimes what's the most boring explanation is actually the real one. Like, it's not as mischievous as the Celtic board sitting round and going, right, we're not going to invest in Celtic this year because of this, and this. And
So you don't think
I
they
think
want to keep Rangers close or real competitors? You don't believe in that kind of thing?
That's kind of what I'm driving at. You do hear that kind of thing, and I don't lend credence to it, and I don't particularly lend credence in it to like their kind of like working against Brendan Rodgers and that type of thing as well. You do hear rumblings of all this all the time. So I think the discussion that I want to have today are kind of on the back of what Brendan Rodgers was saying on Friday again. And I'm not going to go too much into the meaning of what Brendan Rodgers said, but I think there was a couple of notable points. The general theme I felt on Friday from Brendan Rodgers was him distancing himself in some way from the processes going on at Celtic. One of the key quotes for me was when he was asked whether his squad will be strengthened before the Champions League playoff, and he said, "I really don't know. That's my honest answer." And I think he's been genuine that in the sense of he's now trying to focus on the team and taking himself out of the equation. Because I think when you listen to Brendan Rodgers, who again is the only person at the club speaking about this in the moment, I think you can get a realistic sense of where the bottleneck is. He was asked another question by a journalist about whether the problem is with the identification of talent at that stage or the negotiation of transfers and concluding deals. Now, he kind of refused to answer. He said, "I don't really want to go into that. It's not the forum for that." And then he kind of answered the question when he said, "Our scouts and the recruitment team work ever so hard in identifying players and really good players." So I'm just reading between the lines on that. It feels like the bottleneck isn't in the scouting of players now. It's my understanding that, like, well, let's have a discussion, Hamish, about the way it works at Celtic, because there's an assumption, I think, sometimes about who's involved in what. Is Paul Tisdale, what does he have his hand in? So, I mean, what's your understanding of how things function behind the scenes in terms of transfers at Celtic?
So, Paul Tisdale is head of football operations. That's where he was appointed in October last year. Now, in the club's words, his job is to oversee the development and management of effective operations to support high-level football performance, including the identification of talent and the development of talent, in line with the club's objective to develop Champions League players through academy and recruitment processes. So, identification and development of talent to create Champions League level players. So that's kind of his remit. I think is that a new role as well? I don't know if we've ever had that absolute role. I know there's been a few guys in the past, but it's maybe been more recruitment. His doesn't just cover recruitment. I think it's important to say that. It's clearly recruitment is maybe still the kind of key objective there, but he is also dealing with the academy and how that functions. And there's also, I think, various kind of modern processes to do with analytics, and quite vague stuff about supporting colleagues across the club to continuously improve processes. So he's doing a lot. He's not just like head of recruitment here.
Yeah. And like you say, it's very much in the early stages of recruitment, like we're talking about. It's very much in this identification phase, scouting players, basically. That's what we're talking about. And he oversees that. And Brendan Rodgers referenced that again in his Friday press conference, where he said Paul and his staff are working hard to identify players. That's his responsibility, ultimately, is to put forward the players who could be successful at Celtic. Now, and then Brendan Rodgers is also involved at some point in that stage in terms of signing off on targets. So I think what happens, and Paul Tisdale's talked about this in the past, he's had various things and interviews, one on Sky Sports where he had his 9 rules of recruitment, that they weren't all relevant to Celtic, but what I take from when he's talking like that, he likes to kind of streamline the process and filter players out, and come up with systems to filter players effectively. And I think that's what he sees his role in the scouting setup. Now, what happens is they filter out those players, they bring it down to a list of targets, and then Brendan Rodgers signs off on the players he wants. And at that point, Hamish, is when it kind of changes and where there's almost a split at the club in terms of it goes from this footballing kind of department to very much a financial department. in the shape of Chief Executive Michael Nicholson and Chris Mackay, who are a kind of double act in terms of negotiating transfers and concluding the deals that the scouting staff have identified and that Brendan Rodgers has signed off on. And from the outside looking in, it looks like the bottleneck is in that conclusion of deals. It doesn't look like it's in the identification of talent. And that's where the trouble is at the moment. And so you look at Michael Nicholson's role, you look at Chris Mackay's role, and you wonder, are they the people accountable for the delays this summer?
I mean, Chris Mackay was, I don't know if he still is, he was like chief financial officer, wasn't he, at the club? So he would appear to have, a pretty solid background in finances, and I don't know if negotiation is part of that. I mean, other clubs, I know we've kind of done a bit of a look into them on various things. I would assume some other clubs would have maybe slightly more specialised people in terms of people negotiating. But yeah, no, I thought that was interesting from the manager on Friday, because I did actually notice in that answer when he was speaking about scouting, and he really talked up the work that's been done by the scouts, and it seems like they're finding the players.
And he was asked why there's a delay in concluding the deals, and his answer was, there are many things that go into it. I don't do the deals, so I can't answer that for you. And again, it's Rodgers distancing himself from, I feel like, what's going on. And he's probably right to do that. He's not going to throw Michael Nicholson under the bus and criticise him, because why would you do that to your boss in a public forum? So he's right in that to that extent. But at the same time, I do feel like that's where the problems lie. And that's where I get into this kind of, where I think it's a little bit messy, where there's a kind of disconnect between a footballing department and a financial department. And you think about, well, should Celtic pursue a kind of someone in a sporting sense who also has the authority to negotiate and conclude transfer dealings? Obviously, I'm not suggesting they go off on a fly and work out with the remit of Michael Nicholson, but someone who's more trusted by the board to take forward the negotiation and financial side of it. A good example of how that might work, a high-profile example of that is Richard Hughes at Liverpool, who was a former footballer, former Scotland international, and is now sporting director in Liverpool. Now, he doesn't just identify talent and oversee a kind of recruitment department. He's also very involved in the negotiation and conclusion of transfer deals with clubs all across Europe. There's a synergy there that I think is missing at Celtic, and I'm not particularly criticising Celtic for not having that synergy, because I understand the complications of it. I'm just putting it out there as whether Celtic should try to pursue that model going forward, because right now I feel like it's not really functioning as anyone really wants it to.
I mean, the thing I would do is look back, and people tend to do it at the previous manager, Ange Postecoglou, and I think we were a lot more efficient in the transfer market. And I know that, things were different under Ange, and he was leading a lot of it with his guys. But with those guys, Michael Nicholson, Chris Mackay, they would, I take it, have been negotiating deals at that stage as well. They didn't appear to be having the same issues. So is this a kind of, I mean, if you're being cynical, you'd maybe say, kind of when Brendan Rodgers is around, for some reason there seems to be these difficulties come up again. And I'm not blaming Brendan Rodgers, as I say, I think he's distanced himself. But you know what I mean? Like, those things that were criticising here or looking at the club were in place when Ange was there, and we didn't seem to be having this issue. So is there some sort of kind of other issue that we're not aware of here? Because the club seemed to be quite efficient, as I say, when Ange was a manager. Did he just demand a bit more? Was he more kind of hands-on? Did he, as I say, demand that things got done? Is Brendan Rodgers a little bit passive with these things?
It felt like there was a little bit more of a direct intervention at some point in the early stages of Ange, where it seemed like there was, if you remember, when Ange very first came in, it seemed like there was a bit of a delay of a sense, and there was some early deals, but it took a while to kind of get momentum. And Ange actually, in those early difficulties, both on and off the pitch, credits Dermot Desmond as having a big hand in things. And I've got a quote from Ange here. He said, "From my perspective, I couldn't be happier with the support I've received to try and get this club back to where it's been before and was for a long time. The fact we could do it really quickly is a credit to everyone. Dermot was the first person I spoke to with regards to the club. He's very influential and has been very supportive personally and within the club, particularly when we didn't have the smoothest of starts. It didn't last very long, but it was still a difficult beginning. During that time, he was immensely supportive of me. I knew he and the club would have my back until I got the club to where it needed to be. And again, it brings into the sense of who calls the shots at Celtic and who's involved and who's accountable. And I think that's what I'm kind of driving at, is like, if you had someone in a role, a dedicated specialist in a role, they would be visibly accountable for stuff that goes wrong. I think at the moment, part of the problem, and I think maybe part of the problem that some Celtic fans have, is that, is Michael Nicholson really accountable? And like, he's not going to lose his job, realistically, is he? Because he has the ear of Dermot Desmond. Dermot Desmond can't lose his job. He owns 34% of the club, so they're not really directly accountable for maybe things that go wrong in terms of this recruitment strategy. And I think maybe having someone more visibly involved there, I think would go a long way to helping everyone, I think, actually, and certainly helping the perception of supporters as to who actually controls things and what are people's remits. What is Dermot Desmond? How involved is he on a day-to-day basis? The evidence suggests that he is quite involved and quite heavily involved. Martin O'Neill speaking last week that Dermot Desmond was the guy that he went to in terms of transfers and told him how many players he needed and would put forward the case to sign 4 players or 2 players or whoever. Gordon Strachan's talked similarly in the past. Neil Lennon's talked about Dermot Desmond's influence. Brendan Rodgers has talked heavily about Dermot Desmond's influence. And there's this perception that he's some kind of absentee landlord, but he's actually got his hand on things a lot more than maybe some people think. And I think that's just the reality of what the situation is at Celtic.
So just to get this out there, what is it 34% of Celtic that Dermot Desmond owns? I mean, I kind of expected that number to be a bit higher, the way people go on about Dermot Desmond.
He owns about 33 million shares, which works out about 34.6%, I think is the exact figure. It's around 34%. So people assume he's the majority shareholder of Celtic, or a lot of people do. I know a lot of people know that he isn't, but he's actually what is referred to as the major shareholder. He is the biggest single shareholder, but he doesn't own the club in that sense of having outright control. Functionally, he does, because the rest of who owns the shares, the Bank of New York, Nominees Limited, I think that's Linsell Train. They're kind of like an investment company. And the rest of them, I think they vote in alignment with Dermot Desmond because they're very risk averse kind of entities, and they're just kind of along for the ride and along for the kind of long term prospects of Celtic. So they're not going to vote against the prospects of the major shareholder, and that's how that functions at the moment. So he does effectively have control of Celtic. There's no doubt about that. But in terms of his actual stake, it's not a majority stake, and again that. For some, that might call into question into, the amount of influence he has at Celtic. And listen, I'm not saying it's all bad, Hamish. I'm not saying it's all bad, because I think one of the positives that Dermot Desmond brings to the table is stability. It's really is one of the key strengths, I think, of having a figure like Dermot Desmond. And you need only look at the last 5 years' financial results. They're all very, very strong, and actually since COVID they've been magnificent, partly due to continued participation in the Champions League, but record revenue beyond £120 million. And I think part of the reason that Celtic are in the position they're in, the strength of the position they're in, and all the success they've brought, is because of the stability that Dermot Desmond, Peter Lawwell and figures like that have brought to the club over the last 20 or so years. So it's not all bad having Dermot Desmond in place, but you do have to think about what his influence is in regard to the day-to-day operation of Celtic and whether he's the best placed person to do that.
Yeah, and I should probably point out that a lot of the success we've had financially has also been down to the Celtic support, and I know that you would clearly agree with that. So I think it kind of adds to the point as well that there you go. I mean that's different. Is there anything you want to talk about there? I mean ticketing.
£40 million, yeah, ticketing £40 million
Yeah.
the financial year end in 2024, and that's the main tranche of income that Celtic enjoy. And then the commercial sponsorship, retail, merchandising, that totals more than £30 million. And then, of course, you have media rights, and that is the bulk of the Champions League money. And I understand that is a significant part of it as well. But you have to remember that the Champions League money comes as a direct result of success on the field, which comes as a direct result of having the right team in the park. So that's important to consider as well.
Yeah, so, listen to the fans. We have such a vital part to play at Celtic, more than other clubs. And kind of on that topic, so criticism, I think, is an interesting one to discuss with Dermot Desmond, other figures at Celtic, because there's obviously a lot of criticism. I personally, and we have certain dealings with over the years I've had certain dealings with some people who've worked at Celtic and no longer work at Celtic, and I think generally it's fair to say there's a bit of a culture of feeling that criticism is pretty unjust, and I have absolutely no doubt that that's how they will feel inside that boardroom at Celtic Park right now. They'll be looking at the period of domestic dominance that we're still living through, that they've presided over, and they'll argue back that they do get things right, and potentially fairly, because they kind of do domestically, at least. But I mean, the COVID season, which is the one bad season we've had really in the last however many years, one bad season, I think we got a real insight that year into how Celtic handle criticism, and it's interesting. I mean, these are steely businessmen you're dealing with here.
Yeah, and I think in the direct result of the failed 10-in-a-row season, that was very much crisis communications, wasn't it? I think there was a strange Q&A went up on the website at one point. Then there was a kind of interview with Dermot Desmond as well. He's given an interview since, I think he gave one in 2022 that was quite interesting. He's notoriously distrustful of media, Dermot Desmond, and I think that's fair to an extent. That's his personal viewpoint. And part of me wonders is whether that kind of aversion to media, like I'm sure for the fact, I'm not in any way suggesting that Dermot Desmond is watching this right now, but I'm sure if he was, he would hate the concept of us, talking about Celtic in this context as kind of run-of-the-mill punters, if you will. That's just my impression I get from Dermot Desmond. He talked about ill-informed pundits and media personalities in the past, and he did talk about that in 2021 as well. He's also spoken a bit about the kind of concept of fans booing the team and kind of like getting on top of the team as well. There was a book, I don't know if you remember this, Hamish, but there was a book that came out in 2008 called The Celtic Opus, which was this massive media project. I think it was run by the Scotsmen, or certainly they were in charge of producing it. And it had interviews with key figures throughout Celtic's history as a kind of all-encompassing look at who the icons of Celtic were. And Dermot Desmond gave interviews in that, and some of it is quite interesting, I feel. So I'm just going to bring up a couple of quotes from 2008 from Dermot Desmond, if I can find it here. So one of the things he said was about this concept of hypercritical fans, and he was talking about he says this, and this is Dermot Desmond in his own words. I'm not spinning this or anything. I think it's sometimes important to hear Dermot Desmond in his own words, because you get a sense of the character he is and the positives and negatives of that, And he said the biggest contradiction about Celtic and Celtic supporters is from the minority, when those same supporters that sing about being faithful through and through then boo those at the club. That is a complete and utter desecration of that song. I totally abhor anyone like that. Real support is when you're losing. Everybody gives me support when I don't need it. I only want support when I need it. When we are winning matches here, when we are winning trophies or winning the league, there will be people who come up to me at Celtic Park and give me a thumbs up, smile at me and tell me good man. We lose a big match and I'm the greatest bollocks on earth. It's all my fault, all the director's fault. But when we win it, it's down to the manager and the team, not the directors. We are beneficiaries of abuse. We are never beneficiaries of praise. So I always sense there's almost a kind of resentment from Dermot Desmond's part in some aspects to some of the criticism that does come Celtic's way at point. And I don't know if that feeds into what their strategy is in communication with fans. It could well be.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, I think that is the case, to be honest, and I don't think it's just a Dermot Desmond thing either. I think, Peter Lawwell is certainly. I mean, again, that COVID season, how long did we have to wait for any sort of kind of apology from Peter Lawwell? And it wasn't until that Dubai fiasco, and even then they kind of tried to wriggle out of that, and eventually he had to apologise. And Michael Nicholson, you rarely hear from him, never mind an apology. So, yeah, I have absolutely no doubt that the club feel that the current criticism is unjust. They also just this whole kind of stance they have at the club, where they don't want to kind of put themselves out there in any sort of meaningful way. Everything is just quite reserved and almost defensive. And that runs through the entire club. I mean, Dermot Desmond can talk about fans only, praising him when things go well and all that kind of thing, but it kind of runs for the club as well. And that when things are tough, you never ever hear from anyone at Celtic. And I think I mean, we were talking earlier about the processes and all the kind of noise that goes on at the club and amongst the support, but I think a big part of that is that we as fans don't really know what goes on, and you've obviously done a hell of a lot of research today to try and kind of find out a bit more, and I think it's really insightful. But I don't know, like I struggled a bit to prepare for this video because I didn't really know a lot of the time what's actually going on at the club, and that's a problem for me because there are other clubs out there, maybe not every club, but there are other clubs out there who are far more open with their communication and tell their fans this is what the plan is, this is where we're going from here. We honestly don't get any of that at all from Celtic.
Yeah, I think I feel like the last major time I heard from Dermot Desmond was around 2022, and the quotes I had before they're from 2008. So I think it's important to know that those aren't current quotes from Dermot Desmond. So I don't want anyone putting that out there as if they were from 2008.
They won't have changed though, will they? Like that viewpoint won't have changed.
I don't. It's my opinion that I don't. It's not likely that they have.
Yeah.
In terms of 2002, 2022, sorry, I should say. He did talk about transfers a little bit, and a kind of sit-down interview with Jeremy McCulloch on Celtic TV. So I've got his quotes here that I'm going to throw up now. Again, this is an exercise in putting across the club's point of view. Because they're not doing it actively at this moment, I'm performing the role of putting out what the club's outlook on all this stuff is to give people a sense of perspective on what's happening at Celtic right now. So he talked about his involvement in transfers in 2022 when Ange was still at the club. I want to clarify the position, he said. It came up a number of times in misinformed press reports. Again, it's another wee dig at the media, which is fair enough. He's entitled to that. That's his opinion. It came up a number of times in misinformed press reports and other commentaries about recruiting players. The manager of the club has always been, in the last 20-odd years, the one who decides what players to take in. Not the board, not anybody else. Their searches provide information to the manager. The manager then makes the decision, maybe in conjunction with his coaching staff. He makes the ultimate decision. He's the chairman of the board in that sense. Ange is the chairman of the board at Celtic as far as football recruitment is concerned, and all things football are concerned. He is the person, and he's the person who takes the brickbats and takes the credits. So that's as far as the recruitment policy. It is not the board that decides yes or no. But what the board does do is we'll set out the budget for what we can afford so that we are going to be financially prudent in the way we run the club. We do not want the club to get into a financial state where it goes into liquidation and there is going to be a new Celtic. We want our history to be continuous, not to be curtailed through financial mismanagement. Now, obviously, a few not so veiled digs across the city there, which you can take or leave in the context of what we're talking about. For me, it's not particularly relevant. I think there's no danger, nobody's asking for Celtic to become unsustainable. I think it kind of again highlights this disconnect between a football department and a financial department, and there's always going to be that kind of conflict at a lot of football clubs, and Celtic aren't immune to that. But I think we know that Celtic as a club are very much risk averse, and in the past, Dermot Desmond has also talked about kind of the business strategy of Celtic. He gave a very rare in-depth interview to The Athletic a number of years ago in 2020, around the time of COVID, and he kind of laid out what his kind of outlook on in terms of what the business strategy of Celtic should be. So Dermot Desmond said at that time in 2020, as I've said many times, our whole objective is to invest intellectual capital rather than financial capital. That's why we've had really strong board members over the years, unbelievably strong management under our outstanding chief executive, obviously at the time Peter Lawwell, and we prudently manage our finances. We've adopted Mr. Macabre economics, you know the one, annual income, £20, annual expenditure, 19, result happiness. The other case, annual income, £20, annual expenditure, £21, result misery. So it's a very much of Celtic need to wash their own face in terms of finances on a year-to-year basis and, spend as much money as they take in. Now, you could argue, and many will argue, and you might argue here, that Celtic aren't really doing it at the moment because they've got such a high bank balance. And I think that is a fair enough criticism too. Are Celtic doing enough with the resources that they have? I think the club's argument on that would be that, that bank balance it doesn't exist eternally. It will reduce, and in fact, I think it has reduced over the last year or so. So again, it's just it comes into this idea of the football department at the moment being very ambitious with Brendan Rodgers at the helm and wanting to push Celtic forward, and the financial department at Celtic being very risk averse and adopting this stringent financial policy, and will continue to do so regardless of the income or regardless of the riches kind of coming into the club on arguably a temporary basis through the Champions League.
Peter Lawwell, I think, the chairman, he spoke, I think a couple of years ago, when one of the financial figures came out, and it's probably not the only time he said this, but he basically said that the plan here is to have money for a rainy day, effectively, when we no longer have guaranteed Champions League qualification. And I just think, again, that's not kind of in line with how the football department would think. It just seems like such a kind of reactive viewpoint to have, to kind of already be planning and just assuming that a rainy day is going to come, rather than just really trying to maximise everything we're doing and really try and make sure that rainy day never comes. It just seems out of touch with what I think, how we feel about Celtic as a support, and always striving for Celtic to be the best and not accepting anything but the best. So I've never really understood those comments, but I think those comments gave a really good indication into how Celtic view things as well. The thing, I mean, we've had this conversation about this for probably half an hour. Like, what is going to change here in reality? Because you've got, as I say, to their credit, or to the, not to their credit, stubborn businessmen, people who don't bow to what's been said in the media or fan pressure, and it's going to take someone going in and shaking things up for anything to change. I mean, we had Don Mackay did it briefly, and I know Don Mackay had clearly there's flaws there, and he maybe wasn't suited to that job at a football club. But that was someone new who went in and clearly had new ideas and didn't last very long. So it doesn't say much for the ability of someone new going in and actually changing anything. So, I mean, we've had this conversation, but is anything actually ever going to change?
It's a good point, Hamish. And on that, I mean, Dermot Desmond's not one for changing. We know that. He's not a guy who changes his mind. And he holds his belief very dearly. And again, that is his right to do so. And ultimately, he does own the most amount of shares at Celtic, and that's an undoubted fact. And so effectively, to an extent, in a financial sense, it's his ball, and I like a lot of people, feel like the spirit of the club and the dreams of the club are owned by supporters, and that's also our right to hold as well. Just on the stubborn thing, one of the interview that Dermot Desmond gave back in 2008, just on stubbornness, he said in the Celtic Opus, he said, if 1 million people told me to do something in a body of only 1,000,001, and I was the one, and I didn't feel that something was right, then I would take my own counsel. And they can shout and they can exhort all they like, and I will not change my opinion if I think it is the right thing for this club. So
That's the most telling quote of everything you've said so far. Because that just tells if he feels that what he's doing is right, he does not care about anything else that's been said, and he's not the only one in that boardroom either. So, and listen, like we shouldn't just always put that forward as being a negative. Like there's real positives to having that approach as well at times, because if they listen to everything we were saying as fans, I guarantee a lot of the time things wouldn't have gone as well as they have. I mean, the club have been, as you say, incredibly stable through, some challenges we've had. The period of domestic dominance we're going through is great. I just think there's a feeling that we could, as much as we're going through an amazing period, we could be even better. And I just don't feel we're maximising our potential as a club, and in so many departments, virtually every department.
On Dermot Desmond specifically, I'll close off on this, because in that interview in 2020, he was asked about 5 years. What's your vision for Celtic in 2025? And he said in this Athletic interview, or he's at least quoted in this Athletic interview as saying, "I'd like to be able to say that in 5 years' time, our team is better than any of the great teams that were led by Martin, Gordon, Brendan and Lennon." And people will make their own minds up about that, or whether that's the case or not. But that's certainly what Dermot Desmond is quoted as saying in 2020 to the Athletic about what he wants from Celtic in 2025. Just on specifically on what the club have kind of said, the last communication we got in the club on any of this, I feel like, was in the interim report when Peter Lawwell puts out his statement as chairman. And he kind of said, "Our commitment is always to invest in continuous improvement in all areas of the club, and most importantly, in the first team squad. The success of our model has ensured that funding is available to acquire players who will contribute to ongoing success. We invested significantly in the summer transfer window," he's talking about last year, "and while we aim to do more in the recent window," talking about January, kind of admitting that they didn't do what they wanted to, "we go into the remainder of the season from a strong position and with confidence." So in that comment, he's admitting that things didn't quite go to plan in January. I would argue things aren't quite going to plan at the moment in summer. But the caveat to all of this, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of people in the comments telling us this, is there's still time for Celtic to do the business required. And ultimately, that's what we all hope happens.
And this time last year, we were having very similar conversations, and we ended up, spending a fair bit of money and bringing in quality. So I think Celtic will, but no, things could just be a lot slicker. I mean, it's so obvious. Do we need to do this every single window going forward, John? You know what I mean? Like, do we need to have this frustration and division in the support, and Brendan Rodgers being asked about transfers at every single press conference and genuinely seeming quite irked about the whole thing by the end of Friday's press conference? Do we need this every window? Is there not a better world we could be in here? We're all like wanting the best for Celtic here. There shouldn't be anyone involved here who doesn't want Celtic to go and be the best club we can be. And I firmly believe there isn't. There's no one, spoiling things inside the club deliberately. I just think, do we need this every single window? I've just, I think I've had it with this window. I can't wait till we get the players in, it finishes, and we can just go into the season, because I still think Celtic will be successful this season. That's the bottom line for me. I still think, regardless of all of this stuff we get during pre-season, every single year about us struggling and Rangers being better, I still back us to go and have the amazing season and potentially do well in Europe as well.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is, isn't it? I think Brendan Rodgers, in all of his comments over the last 12 months, has indicated that his ambition is pushing Celtic forward in a European context. Now, some might argue that's almost impossible from a Celtic perspective, given the riches that other clubs in that competition have. I think my argument, and perhaps yours and others' arguments, is that, well, give it a try, give it your best shot. And at times it doesn't really feel at the moment like Celtic are giving it the best shot in terms of ambition. But as Dermot Desmond has laid out in some of the words that we're talking about here, and as people have laid out in the past, even Brendan Rodgers on Friday, the club always try to balance that ambition with sustainability, and that the financial department of the club will prioritise that, I think, more than ambition every single time. And I think that's unfortunate. I think there could be more alignment there with the football department. That's why I'm talking about having someone from the football department more closely involved with the board on a day-to-day basis, not above the manager, but working in conjunction with the manager, I think that would be a really positive step. But like you said, I can't really see much changing at Celtic without a change of ownership. And I think Dermot Desmond's been quite clear publicly that he's not really entertaining the thought of selling his stake in Celtic anytime soon. And in fact, has spoken openly in the past about potentially his children taking up a senior role at Celtic, and we know that his son is involved around AGMs and such as his representative, so that's certainly been indicated as well.
Okay, well, that's where we're at today, everyone. Lots of chat. We've fired up a hell of a lot. God, there was a lot to that, wasn't there? A lot of interesting comments that I hadn't actually come across. So good work. Anything else, John?
No, I think we're going to bring in some readers' comments. I think we'll maybe leave that for another time and bring them in. I know we've been going for 50 minutes already. I don't want to keep people too long. I think what I want to get across is what my intentions were today wasn't really to fill out the board or skewer the board in any way at all. What I feel like I was trying to do today is kind of put out information about what the board have said about Celtic, because right now the board aren't saying anything about Celtic, and for me that's a big problem. And I think the support deserve more than that, and I think there should be more communicative over. That's easy for me to say. Should be more easy to talk to, but in regards to this, via club channels if they need be. I'm not asking them to do massive newspaper spreads on this. Club channels, get your messaging out there, tell people what's going on at Celtic, and I think everyone will feel a bit better.
Okay, that's how we'll finish, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. Once again, as I say, this is going to be a weekly show, and they won't always be talking about transfers. We will delve into on the pitch stuff, I'm sure, as time goes on. But yeah, thanks very much. Please, get involved in the comments. Let us know what you made of the show, and we'll return next week. So we'll chat to you then.